with a thank you for all of your service, both your prior military service and now as veterans being business leaders throughout the state. I also want to just sort of acknowledge these extraordinary circumstances that we are experiencing as a country right now, as a state and as local communities. I am now ending my second full week of telecommuting. I will tell you a little bit about how my U.S. Senate office is dealing with this, a little bit of sort of overall background on how Congress has been acting to respond to this pandemic, and then some specifics on probably the programs that you're following most closely, and certainly happy to take a few questions within our allotted time. First of all, it was about 3 weeks ago, I was in Washington, D.C., and we had the recommendation to start teleworking. The Capitol was all but closed down to everyone except members and staff as we were working on the most recent emergency response bill. We're trying to figure out how to represent and advocate for my constituents in remote settings. And I will say that with everybody teleworking, both my staff in the state of Wisconsin and my staff in Washington, D.C., I want to give them a shout out for going above and beyond, trying to keep on top of our casework, on top of our outreach, but doing so with video teleconferencing and on the phone more than we've ever been in our entire lives. Also, we're now at the point where we're continuing to have discussions on development of new legislation because the response is far from over. Please know that despite the fact that our physical offices are shut down, we are collecting all of our phone messages and trying to stay on top of advocacy for the state of Wisconsin and all of you. I am back in Wisconsin and have been working from home and wanted to take an opportunity to tell you a few things about legislation thus far as the pandemic began to sweep through the United States. The first emergency response bill, we called it COVID-1, really related to very much the research on treatments, on cures, on basically bolstering a sort of Manhattan Project to make sure that we had the capability to test, et cetera. The second bill was focused much more on paid sick leave, paid family leave as schools were closed and people were in the position of needing to balance childcare and homeschooling with work responsibilities. And then the third bill, which everyone is paying a lot of attention to, we've called it COVID-3, but it's actually now called the CARES Act. If I use both, think of those as interchangeable terms, which was a dual focus on the public health crisis and the economic crisis that has ensued. They are incredibly interrelated, and until we stop through our mitigation practices, the spread of the virus, bending the curve, as we say, we will not get our economy back and running. And so it is absolutely essential that we continue both investments in testing, in continuing our social distancing, at the same time that we try to protect workers, protect small businesses. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the provisions in this COVID-3, this CARES Act, and then narrow down on the things that impact small businesses and particularly veteran-owned small businesses. There is a general thrust in the economic stimulus provisions that wherever possible, we want businesses, whether they are partially shuttered, completely shuttered, to be able to keep their employees on payroll, even if furloughed, so that we can support those workers during this time through infusions of dollars into the small businesses and keep people as much as possible off the unemployment insurance rolls. That's not possible for many businesses. And so you've seen these staggering numbers, like 16 million Americans applying for unemployment insurance in the past 3 weeks. In the unemployment insurance provisions, basically, that's always been a federal and state program. In Wisconsin, we have our own set of rules, one of which we're hoping the state legislature will tackle, and that is there's always been, or not always, there's been recently a 1-week waiting period before somebody can get unemployment insurance benefits. And then there's a total length of time for which one can collect. And in Wisconsin, it's typically been about $370 per week. What the federal government did is say, first of all, we want to encourage all states to eliminate their 1-week waiting period if you have one. And the federal government will pay for 100% of that first week. So we're hoping the state legislature will act and allow that assistance to come to people who are unemployed. Beyond that, we are increasing by 13 weeks the length of time and adding $600 per week to the state allocation so that most workers on unemployment insurance will match their typical salary rather than getting a small fraction of their original wages or salaries. The other major thing the federal government has done in this bill is to include people who traditionally have had no way of accessing unemployment insurance. These are gig workers, these are freelancers, these are independent contractors, self-employed individuals and groups. And that is being, the guidelines are being fashioned as we speak. And we are hoping that this extension will really get to the people who need it, who've been excluded from this program before. There's obviously a large business program being operated generally by the Treasury Department and the Fed, dealing with groups like the airlines. And then I think what most people on this call are really focused on is the small business aspects of this, most of them being run through the Small Business Administration, the SBA. There's a program that we've been affectionately calling PPP. It's called the Paycheck Protection Program. And that is a loan program whereby small businesses can interface with their lender in order to get Small Business Administration backed loans, some of which are forgivable if used to maintain employees on payroll. I fought very hard during the creation of this legislation to recognize that for some small businesses, overhead, operating costs, things like mortgage or rent or utilities, sometimes that makes up the greater part of their fixed expenses beyond payroll. What we have in the end gotten is 25% of those loans can be used for those overhead or fixed cost issues, but the rest has to be used for payroll. That works for some whose major costs are their labor costs. I can tell you, especially in a state like Wisconsin, where farming is a big deal, oftentimes it is not working where a business is mostly, the fixed costs are mostly coming in the form of overhead. that PPP is one program. Let me say a little bit more about that in terms of the frustrations and challenges that we're hearing from small business owner constituents. Early on in the program, and it's really only a week old right now in terms of operation, people who bank with lenders who are not SBA preferred lenders have been having trouble accessing the program. Folks who rely on CDFI, the Community Development Financial Institutions, have been having significant challenges in getting into the program. A lot of the big banks that are preferred SBA lenders are restricting access to this program to current clients, people who have taken loans from them before. And that again is creating frustration and a lot of anguish. We are communicating constantly with the SBA and with other federal agencies to try to make sure that congressional intent of moving these dollars is met, and is that these programs are faithful to what we were trying to do when we put this legislation together. But there are frustrations, there are kinks, and we're going to continue to work on that. The other program I wanted to talk about in the SBA for small businesses is the economic injury disaster loans. These are loans up to the amount of $10,000, grants basically, and we are really pressing for this program to get those dollars out. And I want to mention on that, I know there's frustration about how 501c6s like chambers are treated in the PPP program. There is no barrier to applying for the economic injury disaster loans. So please, nonprofits, all nonprofits should be looking at that while we work on a larger legislative issue of how do we cover 501c6s in the PPP program. And I just want to share with you that I think that that's a fix that needs to happen, and we are pressing for that. I have just a couple more things to say before asking for your questions, and I apologize for gabbing so long, but I want some context here. When we passed 2 weeks ago today, the president signed the CARES Act, COVID-3. 2.2 trillion is now the estimated price tag on the combined actions that were taken in that measure. And that's the biggest economic and stimulus and sort of public health measure that's ever been passed in really our nation's history, aside from our annual budgets. That said, I think everybody really agrees that it's not going to be enough. And so we have all really started working on what we'll call for now a COVID-4. That bill would, as we're discussing it and describing it to one another and working on provisions, have certainly a focus on fixing the things that aren't working well in the CARES Act, trying to make sure that congressional intent is followed. But also, we're seeing gaps. We're seeing still issues in fighting this pandemic and getting to the point where ultimately we'll be able to reopen either parts of our economy or our whole economy that need to be addressed in a follow-on measure. So right now, Congress is scheduled to reconvene on April 20th. I don't know if we'll meet that date or not, but we are preparing for another round of finding out, not finding out, of legislating. And what you share with me and my staff between now and then is very informative in terms of putting that together. The CARES Act also included important reforms in order to help veterans specifically It included $15 billion to cover COVID-19 treatment at VA medical facilities and community urgent care clinics and emergency rooms. It also included measures related to foreclosure forbearance for folks with federally connected mortgages. So that would certainly protect veterans from foreclosure for the next 60 days, and it's something that we will most certainly look at again. That is mostly what I have to report. On the casework side, I would just say that we continue to hear concerns about the availability of PPE, that's personal protective equipment, in many essential businesses, including in healthcare settings like the VA. And we are pressing as hard as we possibly can to get personal protective equipment to everybody who needs it, who's still engaged in our economy and unable to socially distance and shelter at home. With that, I would love to hear any questions or input that you'd like to provide to me.
Thank you so much, Senator. This is Adam again here from the Wisconsin Veterans Chamber of Commerce. I'll go ahead and moderate the questions here from the chat, and we have about, I think, 12 minutes or so for questions, so that'll be real good. First, I want to share with you from Shannon, who is in private practice massage therapy. She's saying her whole community of massage therapists have been worried about a variety of issues, to include if her business has been listed as essential, will she still be able to get unemployment? And to follow up with that, she says, if I am a sole proprietor and don't have employees, can I still apply for a disaster or a PPP loan?
It is my, yes. I think that for the economic, I'm sorry, let me get the economic injury disaster loan, that the threshold is not whether or not you're deemed an essential business, but whether you have sustained significant economic injury due to COVID-19. For example, 50% or more of your revenue disappearing because of this. It is also my understanding that self-employment without having others on payroll is not how would I describe this? It doesn't prevent you from participating, but the threshold, remember earlier I was talking about the 75%, 25% threshold, that only 25% of the PPP loans can be applied for fixed expenses, overhead, et cetera. I fought for a lot more, a higher percentage, and was not successful in that fight politically. And so in businesses like yours, where the payroll is 0% or you pay yourself, and fixed expenses are a very high percent of the overall operation, only 25% of any PPP loans will be able to apply to that. Let me also reference my website. Baldwin.senate.gov is my website. If you go to that opening page, at the very top it says alert, I think resources for COVID-19. Press on that and you will get to an incredibly detailed set of pages that deal with individuals, families, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, state and local aid, veterans, other resources. Please use that. We have been updating it daily as guidance is released from various departments. Oftentimes, if you press a link, it will bring you right to the federal or state department that operates the program. And a lot of questions can be answered there.
Outstanding. Let's go to the next question. Let's see. From Abe, we cannot thank you enough for all the aid, but in the event that it's not enough and a business has to close down permanently, will there be any protections for business owners from collectors and or lawsuits?
So I think that I'm unaware of anything in the CARES Act that got that that was looking that far ahead. But I could be incorrect, so I always want to make sure that I say that. But I think that's exactly the sort of thing we will be looking at when we put together COVID for the next measure. So, as I was describing the three measures we've passed as emergency responses, it's sort of really progressed as to what time frame we're looking at. Number one was, let's do research on a vaccine. Once we have a vaccine, we can all open up, right? But that takes a while, but let's do a Manhattan Project to get there. Treatment that lessens the severity of the illness would also help us open back up. Testing that's widespread so people can figure out who's had it, who hasn't. All of those are incredibly important first steps. But each bill that we've passed has sort of looked a little bit longer out, and we're hearing a lot of very troubling reporting about our economy that this is going to be it's going to be a recession, and now they're using the word depression. And what we have to do is position ourselves so that the recovery is as fast as it possibly can be.
Absolutely. Let's see. I want to make sure I get these in order. Some people are reiterating other questions. From Lester, when can any financial relief money from the CARES Act or otherwise, or unemployment, or maybe even from a federal level, I know that there's talk of money that's being directly deposited to folks. When can the average Wisconsin citizen expect to see any of that?
Yeah. So the direct payments, which is operated by and large by the IRS, we expect the $1,200 per adult to start flowing early next week. That is generally how it's going to work, but there's going to be some exceptions and some snags. So let me walk through that really quickly. If you have filed a return for last year, and the IRS has knowledge of your banking institution, and that's how, if you've qualified for a refund last year, you got it. That's what they're going to do, is they're going to put $1,200 for you and $500 for a dependent child right into that account. And so people should start seeing that in their account next week. I don't know if they can press a button and do it for a couple $100 million at once, or whether they have to sort of do it gradually over time. But next week is what we're hearing. There are many people in Wisconsin who did not need to file a tax return last year. These are individuals who have a variety of circumstances. People on Social Security whose cumulative income was too low to have them have any tax liability certainly didn't have to file a return. So we mandated in the CARES Act that IRS work with the Social Security Administration to identify those who didn't file a tax return but are yet eligible for the $1,200. And at first, the IRS refused to do that. The pushback was so strenuous that they said, well, we're going to try again. So Social Security also has direct deposit information, because that's where the Social Security payments go. And so there's no reason why they can't, and they're working on that, but I do expect that that will be a little slower. And then there's others who will fall between the cracks because they're neither on Social Security nor did they file returns, and so there we're going to have to provide our best guidance, and my website does talk about how to do that. Lastly, There are people who don't have bank accounts. They're unbanked, as we call it, or they don't provide that information to the IRS, and they prefer their refunds, or in this case, the direct payments, to come by check. That will be a slower process for sure. And there will be people whose addresses have changed. We'll have some challenges with regard to the homeless population for sure, but they are indeed also eligible. And as I know, many on this call are strong advocates for the homeless, including homeless veterans. They are absolutely entitled to this funding. There's a couple of other kinks we have to work out. For some strange reason, this was written so that dependents who are 17 or 18 or even young adults, so for example, colleges have closed, children have moved back home, they're not qualifying for the $500. And we have to fix that, and that'll have to be fixed legislatively. In terms of other money flowing, unemployment insurance, the good news I heard on my staff call this morning is that state of Wisconsin believes that the wait time is now an hour roughly for unemployment insurance claims, with payments going out starting within a few days from the call being completed. That is actually, I hate to say an hour wait is good news, but I can tell you that it was much longer before. So the unemployment insurance program is really trying to staff up, beef up, and those payments should be starting pretty imminently.
Outstanding. Thank you, Senator. There's so many good questions here in the chat, and maybe I'll log them down and put them in maybe I'll send them over to the office and see if we can follow up with everybody to make sure that we cover everyone's questions. One quick last question I want to sneak in here from Randy. You mentioned the new relief package, which I believe you called COVID-4. When do you, if I'm not mistaken, when do you anticipate that being voted upon?
Yeah, that's a really important and it's an important question, and we don't know the answer to it. So, pretty soon after we passed the CARES Act, or COVID-3, we began to discuss things that we weren't able to do. Either there wasn't sufficient bipartisan agreement in order to put it in the package, or it's something that was obvious that needed attending to, and it became obvious after we had already passed the other legislation. And you hear a lot of discussion about those issues. I'll tell you two things I was working on. One was to implement an emergency OSHA standard for this pandemic. We have so many workers who are deemed essential workers, and yet they have no protections in terms of working in close quarters in some cases with others. We don't have emergency standards certainly in some healthcare settings where their supplies are running low and they have to figure out how to prioritize. I mean, these heartbreaking situations are unfolding, and OSHA could play a very strong role in giving interim emergency standards to help protect the health and safety of workers that are deemed essential. Another thing I was working on was invoking the full authorities of the Defense Production Act. I think as veterans on this call, you know that the Defense Logistics Agency knows how to get things out. And you also know that the ability to sort of assess in real time where things are needed, what's needed, and procuring exactly what's needed and getting to exactly where it's needed is, the military knows how to do this. And instead, we have had a supply chain in the health area that has been a spider web or even worse, with hospitals bidding against states, bidding against localities, bidding against FEMA. And so I think that's something that we should look at. But to get to your question, right now we are scheduled as the Senate to come back into session on April 20th. A lot of people talking about how much of this bill can be put together prior to that so that we would be ready to act. There's also a lot of questions about, will it be safe to convene again? Will it be safe to, travel cross country and planes and whatnot, and meet? And so a lot of those things are up in the air and will be reassessed as the public health information comes. But I think I would look at a month time frame, and that's just an educated guess on my part. That within that we're going to continue working constantly to try to put this together, and then hopefully we'll have negotiations underway and be able to vote. And not everyone agrees there should be a COVID-4. So, if you think there should, tell us what you think needs to be in it, and urge all your elected officials in the congressional level to be working for this next response.
Thank you, Senator. I know I said that was the last one, but if you wouldn't mind, I have one other one that I'd like to sneak in here.
Okay.
And it may be a big question here, but we've had several people ask about last week's primary and local
Yes.
elections. And obviously this is a COVID briefing, and kind of the circumstances that surrounded that were COVID related.
Yes.
We have some people even on our staff that never received their absentee ballots,
Yes.
and I know some of them have shown up at postal offices having not been submitted in time. Can you maybe talk about things that are happening to try to rectify that, if there is anything, and what that process looks like?
Yeah, well, I have to just I have to start answering that question with my outrage that there was not an agreement to delay the date. Uh, and I think that the governor was right to call for a postponement so that people could be in a position where they didn't have to choose between their health, safety, and lives and exercising their right to vote. So I just wanted to say that first off. But I had been in touch with mayors and city managers in the week preceding the election, and was hearing firsthand from them about several struggles they were having. One, with the unprecedented number of absentee ballot requests. Many were struggling to get those out on time. At the same time, they were trying to set up for an in-person election. We heard of so many poll workers who, whose health or age put them in a vulnerable category and felt that it wasn't safe to participate. And so many communities reduced the number of typical polling sites to just a handful, not all communities, but some. And getting that information out was difficult, et cetera. So there were a lot of challenges. And then we had the dueling court cases. So we had a district court judge in Wisconsin, federal district court judge, say that people had until April 13th to get their ballot into their clerk. And if it was received by end of business day on April 13th, it would be counted. And an additional order that said no one would announce the results of the elections until April 13th. That was appealed, and they said, Well, that they'll only count if they are postmarked by the 7th. Well, a lot of people didn't get their absentee ballots by the 7th. And there was a lot of folks in Wisconsin who are disenfranchised in these rulings. And frankly, we can't have this happen. So a couple of things in terms of follow-up action. I asked Senator Johnson to join me in a letter to urge Inspector General investigation of some of the problems that we've had shared on in the news on the problems with the postal delivery and delays and reports of some ballots that were found after the election. A lot of murkiness surrounding that. We just want to get the facts and get a clear understanding of this. And I'm pleased that that was a bipartisan request. We want to have knowledge about this because we're going to increasingly need to have voting by mail and absentee ballots as we move forward. We don't want a situation like this Tuesday happening again in our August primaries or our November election. And then I think that as we put together COVID-4, we are having a robust discussion among members of Congress about supporting the states in making balloting more accessible in safe ways where people can maintain their health and, again, don't have to choose between their health and their constitutional right to vote. And so we are hopeful that we can get some strong provisions that will both extend early voting and make it easier for people to vote in person without congregating. And secondly, to just make it far more available for folks to vote by mail.
Outstanding. Well, there you have it, everyone. U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin, thank you so very much for your time this morning and for everything that you're doing for all of us in the state of Wisconsin and beyond, and for your support of the veteran community.
Well, thank you, and thank you again to everyone on the call for your service.
Outstanding. Thank you. And I'll go ahead and throw my video back on here. We do have one more guest to introduce. I know we went over by a couple minutes. So this meeting may go over by a couple. I hope you all can hang in there because we have some more valuable information to provide for all of you. Thank you again, Senator. That was awesome. Folks, Donald Placidi is the division administrator of the Division of Veteran Benefits for the Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs. So for those of you that are on the call right now that are either veteran friendly, veteran supporting, or veterans or military family members or interested in topics relevant to that, you're definitely going to want to hang out. Don, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Adam. How you doing?
Doing good. Sorry we went over by a couple minutes. I hope that's not a problem, but yeah.
No, absolutely. Thank you for having me this morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Saul Newton. Thank you, Adam, for your leadership during this challenging time, and especially for your support of Wisconsin's veterans and their families. Thank you, Senator Baldwin, for taking the time to be here today, as well as your team, for all you guys do in Washington for us. We truly appreciate it. Today, I am here to update you on COVID-19 activities at the Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs, as well as an update on our benefits and programs. Providing a safe and healthy environment for veterans, the residents who live at our homes, and our staff has been a top priority. As the administrator of the Division of Veteran Benefits, I am responsible for overseeing various veteran programs and services throughout the department. First, if you are looking for information on any of our programs, benefits, or services, the staff at our Veterans Benefits and Resource Center can help. As we follow the Safer at Home guidelines, you can reach a customer service representative through the online Chat Now feature located in the bottom corner of the screen at www.wisvets.com. We also encourage use of www.mywisvets.com for learning about eligibility for Wisconsin Veterans Benefits. During this time, the Veteran Benefits Resource Center is unable to answer phone calls, so chat and email is the best way to get a hold of those wonderful representatives. Second, if you are a veteran in need or know of a veteran who is experiencing housing, substance abuse, or mental health issues, we want you to know that there are many resources available to help you or them. We understand this is a really tough time for everyone, but particularly those with underlying mental health issues. If you go to the WDVA website and click on the COVID-19 link, you will find a broad array of resources available to help. Please, if you need it, utilize the Federal VA's crisis hotline at 1-800-273-8255. Other resources are Vets for Warriors. They provide 24/7 confidential peer support to any veteran, service member, or family member. Military OneSource stands ready to assist military members. Anyone can call 211 and get connected to local services. Each and every one of us can help by calling, sending a text or an email, and perform a buddy check for our friend who may be struggling. The WDVA also has staff standing by who can help. Our Veterans Outreach and Recovery Program coordinators are located throughout the state and are able to connect veterans with community resources such as mental health services, emergency shelter, food and housing assistance, access to healthcare, financial assistance, and more. We can provide them the case management. Sorry, guys. We can provide them the case management that veterans need to move forward in a healthy way. The VORP coordinator's contact information is on our website, or you can simply use the Chat Now feature, as I mentioned earlier, and our customer service reps will put you in contact with the right person. Wisconsin has a strong veterans community of which I am proud to be part of, and let's continue to work together to support one another as we get through this challenging time. A couple updates on our programs that I do want to put out here. The Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs announced yesterday that Governor Tony Evers has suspended several provisions of the Assistance to Needy Veterans Grant Program, providing more low-income veterans access to emergency financial aid. This program provides subsistence payments and other healthcare grants to low-income veterans who experience a loss of income. Current rules contain some requirements that would prevent, hinder, or delay payments to veterans who have experienced a loss of income due to COVID-19 pandemic. A temporary suspension of these provisions will allow the WDVA to take the necessary action to assist and protect the health and welfare of Wisconsin veterans and their families. The WDVA has requested the following temporary provisions to ease requirements, remove burdens, and reduce limitations on veterans applying for assistance. Suspension of the requirement that applications include specific verification forms containing the signatures of county or tribal veteran service officers or other authorized agents has been suspended. There is a suspension of a rule limiting an applicant's eligibility to if the applicant income exceeds the 180% of the federal poverty guidelines. There is also a suspension of a deadline by which an applicant must submit an application and receive medical care by a healthcare provider following the loss of income, as well as a suspension of the requirement that an applicant must provide proof that the loss of income occurred due to an economic emergency. The Assistant Needy for Veterans Grant program provides financial assistance to veterans who have exhausted other resources of aid. The grant may be used for specific healthcare and subsistence needs up to a maximum grant limits. These modifications will ensure that our veterans receive the support they need and deserve during this unprecedented time. In addition to that grant, I just want to highlight our employer grant. This is a grant that can give employers who hire a veteran in the state of Wisconsin with a 50% or more disability rating up to $5,000. This veteran could have been hired anytime from the grant's inception, which was back in 2017, as long as the veteran is still currently employed and is either employed at part-time hours or full-time hours. If the veteran is a part-time employee, meets the 50% threshold, the employer is eligible for $2,500. If the veteran is a full-time employee and has met the 50% eligibility threshold, the employer is then eligible for a $5,000 grant. We do have grant specialists still working. They are working from home and doing a great job. With the change to the Assistance for Needy Veterans grants, we are getting flooded with a lot of applications this morning. But I just want to make sure that you do take the time. Please apply. If you have any questions, please contact the Veterans Benefit Resource Center and we will be able to assist you. Adam, that's all I have, and I'd be willing to take any questions that anybody may have at this time.
Outstanding. Well, I think the timing actually may work out pretty perfectly for you then. So let's see. So from Shannon, are they still processing veteran disability applications? I know there may be some delays there. Some have been pending for a while. Is there any updates on that?
Sure. So I do oversee the Milwaukee Claims Unit, which is housed out of the VA regional office in Milwaukee. They are still processing disability claims. The VA did cancel all comp and pen appointments, but anything that was in process or if veterans are still looking to process claims, that activity is still occurring.
So are they not doing comp and pen right now, or is it happening remotely? Has that changed?
There is the option for telehealth depending on the type of comp and pen. They will schedule those type of appointments, but to do a full examination, the VA has canceled all those appointments.
Good to know. What about appeals? Has that process changed?
There's still appeal processes going through. There is virtual appeals. That process is a little bit different than it normally would be, but those options are there, and the timing is what's of concern. They're not quite sure how long that's going to take, but there is a process for the Board of Appeals to work virtually.
Outstanding. Folks, please feel free to throw out your questions here in the chat, and I'll be relaying them to Mr. Placidi here. Let's see, for the employer grant, this is from Alan. For the employer grant, is there any criteria for the business to meet aside from the part-time, full-time requirements?
No, as long as they are not a state agency or a university or a tech college that gets paid by tax dollars from the state of Wisconsin, as long as they are employing a veteran, they can apply for the grant.
Outstanding. What do you see coming down the pipe here for the Department of Veterans Affairs? Maybe not statewide with the WDVA, but maybe in your department. What do you see coming down the pipe? What challenges are facing you, and what are you guys trying to work on?
Well, I mean, in regards of working on, we're always looking to improve our benefits, our programs, our grants, looking for expansion. A lot of that stuff that we would want to change is through legislative action. And, we take a look at those items as we get ready to prepare our biennial budgets going into the 21 to 23 biennial budget timeframe. We always are going to look to improve those programs, and we look to solicit feedback from our community leaders to see how we can improve these programs to make sure that they are reaching the veterans that they're intended for. The main challenges that we always have and we're going to have is just making sure that we reach those veterans in hard to reach places across the state, which is why our community partners, our county veteran service officers, organizations like the Veterans Chamber of Commerce, as well as our veteran outreach and recovery program coordinators, that is the areas where we always are going to continue to struggle. So taking a look at our current programs and expansion is going to be something that we'd look at in the future.
Outstanding. Well, I don't see any other questions there. So, gosh, I think timing-wise, this worked out pretty perfectly. Thank you, Donald Placidi here from the Department of Veterans Affairs. If there are any other questions,